Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the rapid escalation and global fallout of the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis. We're going to dive straight into the facts and the data to see exactly how a highly localized conflict managed to send the entire globe into an absolute tailspin. Okay, let's start right here. $126 for a single barrel of Brent crude oil. Just let that sink in for a second. This wasn't just some minor supply chain hiccup. This was literally the single largest disruption to world energy since the 1970s. And really, it forces us to ask a pretty critical question. How exactly does a localized skirmish instantly paralyze international supply chains? Well, it all comes down to geographic vulnerability. It's like cutting a major artery. Once that happens, the global heart just stops. Part 1. The anchor, the ultimate maritime choke point. To really grasp the stakes here, just look at the sheer volume of resources squeezed through this tiny 21-mile-wide gap. We are talking about 20% of the world's entire seaborne oil trade and up to 30% of internationally traded fertilizers. That's 20 million barrels a day. And the scariest part? There's absolutely no alternate pipeline network out there to just pick up the slack. Moving on to Part 2, the spark. A rapid geopolitical escalation. The speed of this fallout was, frankly, dizzying. It started on February 28th, when U.S. and Israeli airstrikes hit Iranian targets. Then, just 2 days later, the IRGC officially slammed the strait shut. By March 10th, U.S. intelligence had already spotted Iran dropping naval mines directly into the channel. So, in under 2 weeks, the world completely changed. Which brings us to Part 3, the squeeze, the mechanics of a modern blockade. Enforcing a blockade today isn't just about parking big ships in a line anymore. It's this chaotic, dangerous mix of 21st century cyber warfare and 19th century naval tactics. Iran deployed swarms of speedboats and drones right alongside hidden sea mines. But the real kicker? Satellite GPS spoofing. They essentially blinded these massive commercial vessels, making safe navigation mathematically impossible. But here is a really fascinating point. The physical weapons didn't entirely close the strait, the accountants did. War risk insurance premiums absolutely skyrocketed, surging up to 6 times their normal rate. When your transit costs suddenly jump by $250,000 per tanker, well, commercial fleets simply drop anchor and refuse to move. Part 4. The toll on shipping. Ships caught in the crosshairs. By late April, the numbers were just staggering. The International Maritime Organization reported an astonishing 20,000 mariners and 2,000 ships left completely stranded in the Persian Gulf. Just imagine the logistical nightmare there. Thousands of massive vessels sitting completely idle while 20,000 crew members waited anxiously, caught right in the crossfire of a geopolitical standoff they had absolutely nothing to do with. And the human and environmental costs? They were immediate. On March 1st, a projectile struck a ship called the Skylight, tragically killing 2 crew members. Just days later, a sea drone hit the Sonagol Namibe, over 500 miles away from the strait, causing a major oil spill. And then by May, the Haji Ali was struck and total loss to the sea. Part 5. The shockwave. The global economic impact. Look, when 20% of the world's oil is essentially locked inside a vault, markets panic. And I mean panic. March 2026 saw the largest ever monthly increase in global oil prices, hitting that historic peak we mentioned of $126 a barrel. This slammed everyday people at the gas pump and absolutely destroyed manufacturing budgets worldwide. And the economic squeeze went far beyond just crude oil. It spread like wildfire. Europe suddenly faced an acute threat to its energy security, losing up to 14% of its liquefied natural gas from Qatar. Even worse, the global agricultural sector had to literally brace for famine, as 30% of the world's traded fertilizers were trapped behind that blockade. Finally, Part 6, the stalemate, a geopolitical gridlock. As the crisis deepened, it evolved into an incredibly rare dual blockade dynamic. So while Iran maintained its blockade over the Gulf, the U.S. Navy actually initiated its own blockade of Iranian ports, starting in mid-April. We essentially had 2 competing military forces actively restricting maritime movement in the exact same interconnected body of water. Of course, attempts to untangle this massive mass failed repeatedly. In May, the U.S. launched Operation Project Freedom to physically escort merchant ships out. That actually led to a brief pause and the signing of the rather promising Islamabad Memorandum in June. But unfortunately, it was a mirage. By July 8th, Following renewed strikes on LNG tankers, the truce totally collapsed back into open hostility. So that leaves us with a really provocative reality to think about. Despite all of our modern 21st century technological advancements, global stability is still fundamentally tethered to just 21 miles of water. It begs the question, how on earth can international trade adapt when a single narrow choke point has the proven power to completely freeze the world economy? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning how our world connects.